Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, as always, Stan McCune, realtor right here in Greenville, South Carolina. And you can find all of my contact information in the show notes if you need to reach out to me for any of your local real estate needs. And just a reminder, please like, rate, review, subscribe, all of those good things with regard to this show so that we can get it out to as many people as possible. Hey, gotten a few lately, but listen, some of you guys are listening, I know, and you've not even left a rating. Okay, it takes 1 second to just press 5 stars, so please go ahead and do that. And if you can do a few more things, like leaving a comment on YouTube or subscribing or whatever, I would greatly appreciate it. And just a reminder, as always, Piper Insurance Group is sponsoring this episode. They are my go-to. Literally, I'm not just saying it. They are my go-to for home, auto, and umbrella insurance. They're an independent agency, so they can quote multiple different companies and bring you back the best rate that they could possibly find. Licenses North Carolina, Georgia, and of course, South Carolina. And they can help you with fix and flips, ground up new construction, residential, commercial, really anything that you might have. And obviously, if it's a house that's already built, they can help you with that too. So please contact them also in the show notes. They'll give you a free quote today, so please reach out to them for that. I get no kickbacks. I'm not allowed to get kickbacks. Actually, I just went to a ethics continuing ed course. I did not need to take it this year. Nonetheless, it was being offered, and it was being done by one of the lawyers for the South Carolina Association of Realtors, and I find it much more beneficial to take these things in person than to do them over Zoom or some kind of remote option. So I went ahead and did it, and they talked about that. Part of the things that we discussed was that realtors can't take kickbacks, right? We can't refer our clients to someone that gives us money. In fact, for their clients. Um, in fact, I might have some people listening to this who have offered to provide kickbacks to me over the years for client referrals, and I've declined them. I've declined it every single time because it is unethical. We're not allowed to do it. Wish that was another revenue stream for realtors. Unfortunately, because a lot of realtors don't follow the rules in the way that they should, and don't do obvious things that are beneficial to their clients. We have to have all these rules in place in order to ensure that realtors play nice in the sandbox with others. So there you have it. By the way, real quick, before we get into the topic at hand, which we're going to be talking about how sellers perceive their home versus how buyers perceive the exact same home. Not necessarily a Greenville specific episode, but as I say many times in the show, everything I tell you is through a Greenville lens, right? I am a Greenville realtor. I'm a South Carolina realtor. Not everything I say that is broader is going to apply in every market. So just keep that in mind. This one might apply in other markets, but it's, again, this is coming from a Greenville realtor. It's going to be specific to Greenville. But I just want to mention one other thing. If anything looks different, shouldn't look too different because I have a virtual background. That's not actually what my living room looks like behind me if you're looking on YouTube. I recently made some fundamental changes to my office. Specifically, I added a treadmill underneath my desk. Now my desk is more or less, unless I just can't handle it for some reason, more or less in a permanent standing position. So I now have my computer, which I'm using my webcam off my computer, stacked on two board games in order to provide the proper height. If the sound or the video for this episode is different than normal, that's the reason why. And also my headset keeps causing me issues. Try to fix that real quick. All right. Hopefully that'll be better. So I've been thinking about this recently. Sellers and buyers looking at the same home, right? A seller selling their home, a buyer wanting to buy that home. They perceive homes in very, very different ways. And this is something that people frequently don't really think about, to be completely honest. And I felt like it was a helpful thing for us to think about because if you're selling a home, you really need to think about the buyer, right? You don't want to think about yourself. One of the most common mistakes that sellers make is they are the highest bidder on their own home. In other words, their home is more valuable to them than it is to anyone else. And as such, they think that they need to price it at a certain price point. And as such, it doesn't sell to anyone because they priced it where they think it's worth, but it's not worth that to anyone else. The seller becomes the highest bidder on their own home. You don't want to do that. On the flip side, buyers will frequently not think about sellers. Buyers can get kind of in their own little echo chamber in their head, as it were. And sometimes they can be so focused on, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this, everything's expensive, I'm stressed, it's crazy. They'll be so focused on all of these different things that they'll forget that, at the end of the day, it's real estate comes down to negotiating, right? And obviously, they're not the ones negotiating, it's their agent negotiating for them. But I'm going to, as their agent, I'm going to do my best to represent them in a way that's going to get them exactly what they need. But also, I'm going to reflect some of their energy. Now, I don't want to reflect their negative energy. But if I have a buyer that really wants me to go in hard with a hardline negotiation within the framework of my personality, that's what I'm going to do. Whereas if I have a buyer that wants me to have more of like an open conversation and to approach negotiating that way, more of a back and forth, again, within the framework of my personality, within the framework of what's in the best interest for my clients, I'm going to reflect that energy, right? And so oftentimes there ends up just being, people don't realize how much, if they don't think about the other party, how much a negotiation can really go awry. And this is super important. Now, again, for me as an agent, I am negotiating on behalf of my clients, right? So that this isn't something that is like necessarily that buyers or sellers need to be taking notes down of like, okay, here's how I need to approach negotiating in the future. But this will help you to understand better when you're in a negotiation or when you're trying to move forward with something with a home. This will help you to approach it in a better way, maybe be more realistic, all of those good things. I'm going to pull up, if you're looking on YouTube, I'm going to pull up a little chart here that it's a pie chart, and all of the data in here is made up. I'm just going to be completely honest with you guys about that. This is not data that I pulled from the National Association of Realtors or anything like that. Not from the Home Builders Association. I more or less made this data up myself, okay? But from my personal experience, this is basically what I experience when I'm dealing with sellers. So I've got, if for those of you listening, which is going to be the majority of you, I've got a pie chart up here that says home value to sellers. And here's what I have. I have basically, to a seller, roughly 50%. And again, this is just back of the napkin kind of math, right? Roughly 50% of the value that they perceive in their home is based on their original purchase price, right? If you bought your home for $300,000 a year ago, you're not going to want to sell your home for less than $300,000 this year. Same thing. It doesn't matter when you bought it. At any point in time that you bought your home, you don't want it to have gone down in value. And the first thing that sellers assume, or a potential seller assumes when they contact me, is that they will be able to sell their home and come out on the other end of that sale having pocketed some money. Well, the only way that that happens is if the seller sells for more than the purchase price. So the original purchase price is one of those hugely important, even if a seller is not really thinking about it, right? They might not be thinking, wow, I bought it for 300,000 and I need to get this much in order for it to make sense. That's always in the background. That's the starting point for a seller when they're trying to value their own home. They usually start with the original purchase price in their mind, and then they add to that. So what are they adding to that? Okay, so on my pie chart, I have roughly 50% of how sellers value their home is related to the original purchase price. From then you tack on perceived appreciation. I have this about 20% of the pie chart. Perceived appreciation. This is the perception of how the market, maybe broadly or maybe specific to their area, the perception of how the market has appreciated. Now, here's where things get dicey real quick, right? When I'm having a listing presentation with a potential seller, every seller has in their mind that the market has done this or that. They all have some kind of a perceived idea of, okay, here's what's happening. Here's how it's appreciated. Here is, here's kind of what's going on. But where they get that data from, obviously they're not looking at it in the way that I am. They might have seen an article. Home prices have gone up by 20% the past 2 or 3 years. They might see something like that. Or maybe they're basing it off of, well, my neighbor has the exact same floor plan as me, and they sold it for $400,000 a few months ago. Therefore, my home must be worth roughly $400,000, even though I only bought it for $200,000 a few years ago. Obviously, there are those in and of themselves. Those can be useful data points to consider, but that's not how you price a home. But that's a lot of times what sellers are doing. They're using their the knowledge that they have that they think is useful in order to kind of come up with a price in their head. I actually had a seller one time years ago who they basically reverse engineered appreciation for their neighborhood. So they looked at how homes have gone up in value based on when they were bought, when they were most recently sold, and then basically determined, okay, they've gone up by this percent the past few years. What does that mean for my home? And then they applied the same formula to their home. And believe it or not, they actually got it right. Okay. When I did my whole analysis, which was done in a completely different way, the way they teach us to do it in real estate school, which is substantially more accurate, to be completely honest. When I did it my way, I did a CMA and all of that, we coincidentally, and this almost never happens, but we coincidentally came up with the same number. Okay, so sometimes, it's kind of like a blind squirrel. You can find even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every now and then. But that's not the way that you're supposed to determine home values. And so sellers oftentimes, they're starting with this. My pie chart, roughly 70% of my pie chart here is dedicated towards the original purchase price plus the perceived appreciation. That's what makes up the majority of what sellers are looking at when they're trying to determine what they think their home is worth. Then you add to that the value of improvements. I put this at around 15%. This could be different, for some sellers and for others. Some might focus more on the improvements that they made to a home rather than the perceived appreciation. Just kind of depends. I think in general, most are more focused on the appreciation than they are on the improvements, but it's close. There's a reason why I have them as a similar value, because you might even say that they're about the same value, right? A lot of sellers put a lot of stock into the improvements that they've made to their home, but there is a major flaw in the way a lot of sellers assume the improvements that they made to their home works. The biggest one is that there's an assumption that you get back dollar for dollar, if not more, for every improvement that you make. Well, it just doesn't work that way. In fact, the National Association of Realtors has some fantastic data out there on what improvements bring back the most value. If you're interested in that, I can pull that out for you and find it for you guys. But long story short, most improvements that you make do not bring back dollar for dollar what you put into them. If you threw in that nice, $100,000 outdoor kitchen, you're probably not going to get $100,000 more than your neighbor who has everything else exactly the same, but doesn't have the $100,000 kitchen, right? People aren't going to value that outdoor kitchen in the same way that it costs for you. People don't care about the cost, okay? But that is a common thing. And One thing that is true when it comes to both the perceived appreciation and to the perceived value of improvements to a home is that sellers uh, tend to downplay their neighbors, right? Uh, they tend to be overly critical of their neighbors. Well, my neighbor also has an outdoor kitchen, but it's not nearly as nice as mine. Mine has a big green egg built into a quartz countertop. They just have granite. They have the knockoff version of the big green egg. It's just not the same. That's the kind of things I will hear from sellers. Same thing when it comes to appreciation. They'll be like, well, this neighbor over here sold for 400. Now the person right next to me only sold for 350, but that's because they hadn't put nearly as much money into their home as I have. Or they've not kept up with it nearly as much as I have, I think that their cat smells, and so there's always this and that, and usually sellers will overinflate the value of their home because they are simply being overly critical of their neighbors and of the comps that compare to their home. You don't want to do that if you're a seller, right? Don't be the highest bidder on your home. That's a really bad idea. The fourth category here out of five, these each have five categories, is the emotional investment. I have this as 10% of the total pie chart. Emotional investment. Now, a lot of sellers are not completely in tune with the emotional investment that they have in their home. Sometimes I discover as part of the process that they will become more emotional, right? Maybe they have not been thinking about it, and now that the rubber has met the road, we're talking about listing their home, we're getting the plan in place. I write up a nice little description, send them the description, usually oftentimes as part of that, I will ask sellers. Sometimes I don't get great answers to this, but I'll ask them, what's your favorite thing about this home? Or what's your favorite memory from this home? Sometimes I can use information like that in my listing descriptions. And sometimes it's at this step in the process that sellers will become emotional. They'll start to realize, wow, this is actually happening. I'm leaving this home where I raised my kids, and we buried our dog in the backyard, and we have all these memories, and this is the first place we lived after we got married. Just all of these things, and there is an emotional investment. And I'll tell you what, that emotional investment is strong. I know I have come across some sellers that were willing to sell for less money to buyers that they liked more because of how emotionally invested they were into their home. They wanted the right family to be in there. They were willing to take less money to sell their home because of that. Well, we have to be careful with that. Me as a realtor, I never ever encourage sellers to do that because that could be a fair housing violation. Usually it is. And by the way, fair housing doesn't just apply to realtors. It also applies to real estate consumers as well to a certain extent. And so you have to be careful. Those emotions don't cloud your judgment to the point that you do something that's actually illegal. Got to be very careful about that. But the emotional investment makes up a large portion. I mean, not in comparison to these other things, but I have it just beneath the value of improvements. And I think that that's accurate. I think for a lot of sellers, that emotional investment really is really high up there. Now, do I have some sellers that uh, they're just straight capitalists? There is no emotional attachment at all. Yes, of course I do. And, that happens a lot. There are some sellers that are just really, really dialed in on details. They're not really thinking about the emotional element. But if they're married, odds are their spouse is concerned about the emotional element. And there's a whole lot. I could tell a whole lot of stories that go in both directions when it comes to this. All right. Last but not least, with regard to sellers, the value of intangibles. I only have this at 5%, but I do want to mention this. Sellers will talk about intangibles, and this is a number that can fluctuate greatly, right? There could be a lot of intangibles that a seller is really focused on. Oftentimes, though, if this becomes a big thing, sellers are just not going to want to leave. So when I say intangibles, what I'm talking about are things like quiet street, friendly neighbors, good HOA, nice dogs or cats or whatever in the area. Things like that, intangibles that you can't really quantify and that are really hard to market. Like again, talking about fair housing, you can't really say there's friendly neighbors, right? That implies that there other places don't have friendly neighbors. That's, you could read into that a lot of different ways. I can't really say that when I'm listing a home. I'm not really supposed to say that off the record either. It's just like buyers just need to go and figure it out themselves, unfortunately. And so this is the value to sellers that oftentimes is not even marketable. And this is something that, like I said, in some cases can be really, really valuable to a seller. But there's just, at the end of the day, it's not it's really hard to actually give true value to that. But sellers absolutely consider that in the value of their home because they know it is valuable. Like there's no question that it's valuable. The problem is that it's intangible, and as such, it's hard to quantify. It might vary from one person to the next. You might love your neighbors because they never talk to you, right? My neighbors, I don't like hardly ever hear from them, and I love that. Okay, but I talk to people all the time that they want to be best friends with their neighbors. Great. That's not the kind of home I want to live at. If you came to me and you told me, you're gonna love this neighborhood, everyone, we have block parties all the time. Everyone's getting together. We're having a great time. I'm gonna hear that, and I'm like, that's negative value to me, right? And so you also have to be careful with that, right? When you're talking about emotional things and intangibles and things of that nature, it might land on a buyer differently than it lands on the seller. So let's pivot and talk about buyers. I'm going to close out my seller pie chart here, and we will, for the purposes of YouTube, pull up the home value to buyers. All right. Home value to buyers. The pie chart looks completely different than sellers. And this is why I decided to do this episode, is that it really is interesting how the perception is so different. So the number one category on the pie chart that I'm looking at here, when buyers are assessing, and now I'm assuming that the buyers have already kind of pre-selected, this made-up home. It's something that they're seriously considering, right? We're not talking about here's a list of homes and the buyer is selecting, the home with the best curb appeal and the best kitchen and all of that. No. I'm talking about, let's say that a buyer has already kind of said, I really like this home. Now we need to figure out what we're going to offer on it. These are some of the most important things that a buyer is considering. And the number one thing, which I have as 40% of the pie chart for the buyers, is the price compared to other actives. Something that a lot of people, even buyers, don't frequently think about because there's so much focus on, well, how does it compare to the comps, right? You hear that a lot. Comparable sales. That's what comps stand for, in case you didn't know. What do the comps say? And when you look at Zillow, you look at Zillow's estimate, you look at all these other automated valuation models, and all of these other web models that are out there, they'll give you a number that they think a home is worth, and that's all based on comps. But when buyers are out there looking at what homes are available and trying to determine what they want to purchase, they're not looking at the comps first. They're not looking at what sold 3, 6, 9 months ago. What they're looking at is what is active and for sale right now. How does this home compare to the other homes that are for sale right now? And that is something fundamentally different between buyers and sellers. Sellers oftentimes are completely unaware of the homes that might be competing with theirs that are currently for sale. But buyers are completely concerned with this, right? Because they're trying to figure out the home to buy. And what they're looking at is not the homes that aren't for sale. They're looking at the homes that are for sale, which are uh, the active homes in MLS. So that's the number one thing. The second thing on here is, which I have as 30% of the pie chart, is the price. And I just realized that on my pie chart, it doesn't complete the thought, but the price compared to recent comps, okay, is what it's supposed to say on my pie chart. Sorry about that. The price compared to recent comps. What have neighborhood or nearby comps sold for? So I said before, it's not the first thing that buyers look at, but it is something that buyers look at. It's the second most common thing that buyers want to know is, okay, I like this home compared to other homes, but is it priced correctly? Am I overpaying in this neighborhood? I don't want to overpay in the neighborhood. And that's where the comps come into play. Now, thankfully, this is one area where the Venn diagram does overlap between sellers and buyers, because there's been enough education, general education, real estate, that both buyers and sellers have to understand that this is how you determine a home value. The difference is that they're going to be critical about different things, right? The seller is going to be critical about all of the comps, and the buyer is going to be critical about the subject property in contrast to the comps. They're going to look at the comps and say, well, this one had a bigger yard, this one's in a cul-de-sac, this has a fully fenced in yard, this has a remodeled kitchen, this has a huge primary suite, blah, 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 blah. And they're going to compare that to the subject property and say the subject property doesn't have any of these things. It's not comparable. It should be priced for less than these other homes that have all these great things, right? And then sellers, they're looking at their home and they're comparing it critically to they're comparing all these other comps critically to their own home, which I think is nicer than all the others. I'm talking in very broad strokes here, but this is generally speaking what happens. I'm not saying that there aren't sometimes very, very educated and realistic buyers and sellers. Again, broad strokes here. Natural human inclination. This is what typically happens. The third highest thing on the home value to buyers pie chart that I have here is the value of lifestyle improvements, okay? Or what I sometimes called the lifestyle investment. In other words, you can think about it this way. Will my monthly or annual costs to live in this home improve my life enough to justify the cost? Every buyer, when they are buying a home, they're not buying a home, okay? Let's get something very clear here. Yes, they are buying a home. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But they're not only buying a home. What they are buying is a lifestyle improvement, or a perceived lifestyle improvement, or you could say a lifestyle investment. What do I mean by that? They want to have less commute. So they're buying a home that is closer to their kids' schools, closer to work. They want to have more space for their kids and animals to run around. So again, that's a big upgrade to lifestyle, right? You can just send the kids and the animals out in the backyard and they can just run around and do their thing for a couple of hours. That's a lifestyle investment. Something that, if you're moving out of a condo and you don't have a yard, and now you can buy a house that has, a nice 0.3, 0.4 acre, fully fenced in yard, that's a huge lifestyle improvement. I could keep going on and on and on. Maybe it's just the neighborhood. Maybe the neighborhood is just a much nicer neighborhood than again, that condo neighborhood that you were in. Who knows? But basically, buyers, they are looking at that lifestyle improvement and that lifestyle or potential improvement and that lifestyle perceived investment, and saying, how much am I willing to spend in order to improve my lifestyle in this way? And so even if you have the perfect home, if it doesn't improve their lifestyle in some sort of tangible way, it's not going to work for them. And that might be, if you're a seller, that might be completely out of your control, right? You might have made your home perfect and it just doesn't work for these people because they want to be at jail man school, and you're not. Your home is not in that school district. It's not even close to it. They're not even considering your home because of that. You have no control over that. But these are the things that buyers are thinking about, and these are the sorts of things that will cause buyers to rule out a really, really nice home instead of deciding to make a move on it because they might see the value of the home. They might have already looked at, okay, well, the price compared to other actives, the price compared to recent comps in the area, it's priced right. It just doesn't price right for me because it doesn't bring me the lifestyle improvements that I want, or it's just too much money. Like the lifestyle improvements are more important than the home being super duper updated or being priced super duper well. So it's a no for me. Okay. And these things are more and more major factors in this right now as the housing market has become less and less affordable due to mortgage rates being where they are. Buyers are becoming pickier. They really want the home to have everything in order to justify the cost. And this is something that sellers tend to not understand, right? And again, sellers have that emotional investment into the home, and so to them, they think about all the great ways that it contributed to their lifestyle over the years. But buyers, they have to try to almost model it out, right? That's what buyers are functionally doing. They're modeling in their mind what how their lifestyle will change as a result of purchasing this home. And sellers need to just keep that in mind, and buyers also need to be aware of it, right? They need to be aware that they're processing the home in this way. The fourth thing I have on here, which is 8%. Okay, I had to get a little. I tried to keep these round, but I kind of ran into. I wasn't super happy with this pie chart. I tweaked it a few times. I came up with 8% as the value of home improvements, and that might feel low, right? Because I had sellers a lot higher than that. And buyers, when they walk into a home, they will be wowed by updates, by improvements to a home. But here is the thing at the end of the day, okay? Updates are expected. Buyers expect in this market, they expect the home to be updated. They expect it to be in good shape. They expect the kitchen to be updated. They expect the bathrooms to be updated. And if they're not, they expect the price to be greatly reduced. So updates and improvements aren't as big of a value add as sellers think they are. And if they don't fit the buyer's design and or functionality preferences, they add no value. You might have done an incredible job updating your kitchen, but you made it super duper modern. And you have a buyer that likes more classical, more classic, I shouldn't say classical, more classic, traditional, that's the word, traditional kitchens. They might walk in and say, that's a great example of a modern looking kitchen, and I hate it, right? So updates are expected, but they can actually detract if you go with something that is really specific to your taste. Or again, I mentioned functionality. If you go with something that looks great but isn't functional, like you've got that bathroom that looks incredible, but it only has a single vanity. It doesn't have a double vanity. The toilet's in a weird spot, but it's super high end tile. The vanity, that single vanity is really, it's a $5,000 vanity, really nice, has quartz, all sorts of stuff. Buyer's not going to care. They don't like it's not functional for them. Doesn't work. And so sellers need to understand this, and buyers are just going to perceive these updates as they will. But sellers need to understand, again, this is why you don't get dollar for dollar for your updates, because one of the reasons is that you as a seller updated your home for you, right? Unless you're a house flipper. Then, as a house flipper, you're trying to think through, okay, what would my target buyer want? but you're never going to give the buyer exactly what they want. And so you're not going to get back dollar for dollar usually on updates. There are exceptions to that. I've talked about that in previous episodes. Obviously house flippers are good at a few different things, and one of those things are finding those updates that will produce more money than they cost. And those do exist. But it's got to be the perfect situation, the perfect fit. All right, last but not least, for the home value to buyer is the value of intangibles. So here's another thing that does appear on both the buyer and seller pie charts, but the value of intangibles on the buyer side is only 2% of the entire pie chart. Intangibles are a minor factor and, quite frankly, generally work against the home for buyers. Why? Because buyers assume the worst. It might be a huge intangible that you love, that there are so many great friendly neighborhood dogs that bark when they see someone that they don't like or that they don't know. And that's like, you don't even feel like you need an alarm system. I actually heard someone say this exact thing recently. They were just like, I don't even need an alarm system because my neighbor has great dogs that they bark the moment anyone pulls into the driveway, near my house. Guess what? When a buyer pulls in and the dogs bark at them, their assumption is not going to be, wow, what a great, I don't even need a security system. We have these dogs here. No, their assumption is going to be, these dogs are going to bark at me every single time I pull in for the rest of my life. And they might be aggressive. What if one of them gets out and attacks my 3-year-old daughter? Not cool. I don't want those dogs around here. See, this is where the intangibles, they factor in, but they don't factor in that much, right? A lot of buyers would be willing to do a little bit more due diligence, maybe walk over. I've seen some, in those cases, they'll walk over to the dog. Let's just see how the dog responds, right? Obviously, if it's behind a fence, not if it's just sitting on the front porch. I don't recommend you do that anyway, but I have seen buyers do this sort of things. They'll go check out the dog. They have concerns about the neighbor. They'll go talk to the neighbor. They have concerns about this or that. Who knows? But the intangibles don't factor in to the extent that sellers think that they factor in. And when they do, they're typically a negative. Okay? I don't like to focus on intangibles for this very reason. There are some times when there can be an intangible aspect that can be brought out in a home listing in a tasteful way, in a way that's broad enough that won't be interpreted the wrong way, all sorts of considerations. But generally speaking, buyers are focused on objective things, not they are emotional, but they're not focused on the things that are emotional to you, right? They do like intangibles, but they aren't going to assume that the intangibles that you love are going to be the intangibles that they'll love. They might be aware of what you purchased the home for, but they're more concerned about how does the home's price compare to what's on the market now or what's sold the past few months. They're going to be less concerned about improvements and things like that. Those are assumed. They're going to be more focused on, okay, how does my lifestyle get upgraded, and is it upgraded for a good price, right? Does this make sense? Is it worth it for me to leave the situation I currently have in order to spend a lot more to buy this home to change my lifestyle? Is it going to be a positive lifestyle improvement? These are the sorts of things that buyers are focused on, in contrast to sellers. And hopefully that's helpful for you guys if you're looking to buy or sell in the future. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for making it all the way to the end, for listening. My contact is in the show notes if you need a realtor in Greenville. Piper Insurance Group, also in the show notes. Like, rate, review, subscribe, all of those good things, and we will talk again next time.